Welcome back to the final part of our podcast mini-series about the industrial workers of the world, Starbucks Workers Union of the early 2000s. If you haven't listened to parts 1 or 2 yet, I'd go back and listen to them first.
Alla mattina, appena alzata, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao alla mattina.
Before we get started, we just wanted to remind you that our podcast is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Our supporters fund our work and in return get exclusive early access to podcast episodes without ads, bonus episodes every month, 2 exclusive podcast series, fireside chats and radical reads, and free and discounted merch and other content. So our supporters can listen to an exclusive bonus episode with more information about the Starbucks Workers Union and its historical context. So if you can, please do consider joining us and helping us preserve and promote our history of collective struggle. Sign up and listen today at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. In addition to organising in coffee shops in the US, the IWW Starbucks Workers Union also teamed up with coffee growers to confront Starbucks' exploitation of workers in the global south.
I would be really remiss also, if I may, not to mention the international linkages that we had, because it was very international vision that we had. The really amazing, I mean, they're all amazing, but one that was truly remarkable, I think, in some ways, was our partnership with Ethiopian coffee farmers.
This is Daniel Gross, who had worked at Starbucks since 2003.
So the coffee farmers in Ethiopia were growing beans. Starbucks was roasting and selling, of course, at a huge markup. Something remarkable happened in that the coffee farmer collectives, they wanted to basically benefit from the use of their ancestral coffee growing region names, right? So they had an initiative to capture their own value from their own ancient ancestral lands. Starbucks decided they were going to go and block that effort. Said, no, you can't do that, etc. And was literally denying these coffee farmers value from their own lands. And so the farmers were leading a campaign. And we were able to link up with them on the barista side. And that was not really a common thing. You know, there had been consumer anti-sweatshop work and whatnot, but this was, folks in Starbucks so-called value chain, either directly or indirectly, but basically working for Starbucks across the globe and across the supply chain, making common cause. We were able to find out and discover exactly what Starbucks was paying for the beans. They had obfuscated that, and we were showing that really the coffee farmers were only getting like 2.2% of what the beans would retail for. And ultimately, it culminated in a barista delegation to the Ethiopian coffee growing lands with the organized coffee farmers there. We generated media around that, which really exposed a lot of Starbucks lies. Big one was, oh, we built this bridge for the Ethiopian coffee farmers, and Starbucks probably spent millions marketing and advertising some bridge. We actually found it, and we brought the press. It was like a 10-foot slab of concrete. The coffee farmers said, we didn't even need this thing. We don't even use it. It was just a complete fraud. And in fact, the farmers were crystal clear. We made a video, and actually, I think there's a piece of this got into the final video of, we don't want your programs. We don't want your, hey, we built this thing for coffee farmers. We want a fair price for the fruit of our labor. So it's a beautiful coalition. Ultimately, the coffee farmers, through their leadership, they prevailed. Oxfam played a good supportive role of the coffee farmers as well. Starbucks had to back down and remove their blockages of this effort of the Ethiopian coffee farmers and sign a licensing deal with them to use their ancestral homelands in branding and marketing. That was incredible.
Outside the US, the example of the IWW Starbucks Workers Union inspired organising in several other countries.
The Chilean baristas started organizing a couple years after us. We were the first baristas to stand up with them. We did a global day of action with them, with our global folks, IWW, and then like-minded unions in Europe and Latin America rose up with the Chilean workers. They would ultimately prevail in their demands and through a strike that they did and continue to win gains at Starbucks. That's some of the international pieces as well. That was an important part of the Starbucks Workers Union's vision.
In 2005, Starbucks workers at a store in Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand, walked out in protest against low pay. After the company planned to bring in managers to scab on the strike, workers at 10 other locations walked out in solidarity as well. And in 2011, around 200 Starbucks workers in Chile, out of the total workforce of 670, walked out on strike demanding a pay increase in line with inflation. Management did manage to keep their approximately 30 stores in the country open, running them with scabs and managers. But a couple of weeks later, the strike ended and the company agreed to implement a 10% pay increase, which they claimed was nothing to do with the union or the strike. But before this point, they hadn't given any pay rises in 8 years. So, as with the increased pay for workers in the US, this seems a little too much of a coincidence to be believable. Back in the US, because of the unorthodox approach of the IWW to organising at Starbucks, they never got exact numbers of how many members or activists they had.
There's obviously different moments of peaks and valleys at that time. And we also had kind of different membership approaches, right? You could be a red card holding IWW member, Starbucks Workers Union. There was, I think, long stretches where you could also just become a member of the campaign without becoming a dues paying member. And then, of course, there's many people who would participate in meetings and actions and so forth that probably never signed any kind of document. They're just in the solidarity culture and in the organization and through their participation. So yes, there's not. I think some people have tried to tally the numbers. No one's gonna really ever be able to fully tally the numbers because of the different ways to get involved. And so at any given time, there is approximately between 300 and 400 baristas that would have formed the really active core of the union. And then those, say, 300 to 400 baristas would be moving, somewhere in the low, let's say, 1 to 2,000 range of others that were participating in meetings and actions. And then, of course, a larger group that would have, signed on to petitions and that type of thing, which I won't include in these numbers. So we never were approaching that sort of 100,000 plus worker, the total constituency, but we've had a very solid, influential core that was operating, over a long stretch of time.
The membership of the union to an extent reflected the diversity of the Starbucks workforce, but pre-existing IWW members like Daniel were disproportionately white, and so to an extent this ended up reflected in the union.
I think back to the coworkers, that were super active and, it's a really just an incredible diversity of folks, Latina folks. One of our great New York leaders was indigenous Ecuadorian, Black folks, Afro-Caribbean folks. I think it's definitely fair to say that white folks were probably overrepresented in the group. I would probably guess, but I would never, never want anyone to erase the just incredible leadership of baristas of color and queer women baristas, obviously not mutually exclusive categories in the union.
As is occurring today as well, one key feature of the organising campaign at Starbucks was the vicious union busting by the company.
Starbucks built a giant anti-union operation. I mean, quite staggering in size. It all started within a day or two. Howard Schultz, the chairman of the company, kind of fired the opening shot. In those days, how it would be a senior executive would kind of leave a voicemail, supposedly, and the voicemail would be transcribed and it would be posted in all the stores. Within a day or two, every store in the country had a quote voicemail posted on the bulletin board from Howard Schultz opposing the union. He said he was disappointed and disturbed at these quote disgruntled New York baristas. Definitely remember the word disgruntled and New York in there to try to kind of limit those New Yorkers. You know how they are. And of course, this is all workshopped by their PR company. Remember, always say disgruntled. So that was kind of the opening shot as far as we experienced it. Soon after, my store was flooded with senior managers. Schultz himself came. So that was the start. And from there, it just amped up. The Starbucks anti-union campaign had three major players. One was the Starbucks executives from the top down. Two was their union busting law firm, which is called Aiken Gump. The footnote, the leading Aiken Gump union busters that we went up against for this whole period, they have recently been hired on to the law firm currently doing Starbucks' union busting. So there's a invirtuous circle there for you. And then the third player was the Edelman PR firm. It's really important we get their name in there because they're really a nefarious player, and it's important to understand these PR firms. I think we talk more about the union busting lawyers, but the PR firms, they do a lot of the strategic, tactical. It's not just media. They do a lot of the influence campaigning of trying to marginalize baristas, moralize baristas, divide baristas. So those were the three forces. And it was all out. It was everything from, puffing up the supposedly good parts of working at Starbucks. It was saying that unions are obsolete. It was packing stores with managers to either woo or intimidate you, depending on what they thought would be more effective in the moment.
A common tool was an unlawful but tried and tested one, just sacking organisers.
The firings were definitely the most blunt and brutal, and sadly was an effective tool for them. Just when baristas would emerge as just highly respected coworkers into the union and be kind of motivating and helping other coworkers participate and co-lead in the campaign, many of those folks were just simply fired. But yeah, there's no ethical limit to it. In one of the May trials we won against the company, I think we got 100,000 documents. One of the documents was a senior manager, could have even been the CEO. I can't quite recall. A very senior executive instructing an underling to spy on one of our conference calls in our Justice from Bean to Cup campaign, which was the coffee farmer barista, and we also had a student component to it. Just right there in black and white, many of their documents just openly show how brutal and widespread the scope of the union busting was. They spent just so much on it. I mean, one obvious place is these lawyers killed so many forests with their legal documents that I can only imagine how many hours they built Starbucks for these trials and legal documents and advice, but also just manager executive time. So Starbucks created a whole national, potentially international, I don't know, but at least national training. It was called, get this, Creating the Environment. That was the name of Starbucks National Anti-Union Management Training that they created to try to rebuff the IWW. And, just think about all the hours they have to pay all these people to develop and carry out and follow up on these trainings. So it was a very ruthless A+ campaign. I give them credit. I've gone up now against, many companies, my own workplaces, but accompanying workers building in theirs in many, many industries. And, they're up there. They're at the top. There's others that are as good as them, but there are many, many employers that are far less effective at union busting. So yeah, that was what we were going up against, and it's really just a credit to the robustness of solidarity unionism, the courage of my coworkers, the community that we were able to build together, that we were able to stay on the offense and hit hard and push on our issues on wages and staffing and more secure hours and anti-discrimination and, make the gains we're able to make.
One of the individual victims of this union busting was Daniel himself. We go into the full story of what happened to him in the bonus episode, available for our Patreon supporters. Link in the show notes.
So I was not able to go back and continue my job, unfortunately. But we did win many reinstatements.
Now, these reinstatements are one rare aspect of labour law which is actually stronger in the US than in the UK, from the perspective of protecting workers. As in the UK, it's pretty much impossible to get your job back, even if courts establish you were fired unlawfully. But one thing it's important to realise is that even when workers in the US do manage to win these cases and reinstatement, often the process takes so long that any organising effort can have long since been extinguished.
Years had passed because there was, the trial and then the first appeal and then back into the circuit court, many years. I know Joe Agins Jr. was a really active New York barista. I think he wanted his job back. I think it was like even 10 years later, just to give you like a reference.
Ultimately, in this long war of attrition, while the union landed many blows, the company wound up the overall victor, and the IWW Starbucks Workers Union fizzled out. But many of the improvements they won remain to this day, and some of their victories helped pave the way for a new wave of work and organising in the 2020s, with the background of the COVID-19 pandemic and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement.
So we had union power at Starbucks for 15 years, and we were able to achieve so much, build this community and win these gains. But we weren't able to fully realize our vision, right? Or our strategy or aspiration. With 15 years is a good run, but we wanted to go further than that. Ultimately, we didn't have a model that was really robust enough to overcome, at that long of a stretch, the firings of so many leaders. That was a key part. We also, we were working at a time where there were Starbucks Workers Union, there were some other kind of shining lights in that moment of labor, but they're very few and far between. The macro factors were not good in that era. So I think we probably took things as far as we could go in that macro era.
Despite the spark of some radical social movements in the early 2000s, in general, it was still part of the long period of defeat for the working class in the US and elsewhere since the 1980s and the era of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And the IWW just wasn't able to keep going in those conditions.
I mean, there was no collapse or anything like that. Just the sustainability that had worked for that decade and a half, it didn't hold longer than that. So we weren't able to go all the way. Some of the, I think, really heartening things are what exists now that didn't exist then. Solidarity unionism, although it has many antecedents and lineage in history, it's a new path in many ways, or it's maybe new again. The Starbucks Workers Union was really the first really big, successful attempt at this kind of unionism in literally decades, right? Literally decades. So we didn't have the frameworks, the tools, the community, and the infrastructure that Solidarity Union is today do have, right? So, for example, where I'm organizing at now at Sun Solidarity Union Network, we have a tool where workers in their workplaces, their industries, literally design and discuss and analyze their complete union model, scrutinize the sustainability of each part, test the things that seem to be needing a little bit of experimentation, do that diligently, do that in a community of Solidarity Union builders. I know the IWW is also advanced in its infrastructure, its training over time. So, those are really, really good things. And then there's been some good macro developments as well, right? We've seen a working class in motion in the last, say, 10 years than we have seen in many, many, many decades, right? At least 50 years. Some would even go back to the 30s, right? So, there's some stuff to really be optimistic about in some of the things we validated in the Starbucks Workers Union, but couldn't get beyond that decade and a half hurdle that are calling out to be used and developed in this particular moment, especially not just because of this, but especially because of how blocked off the NLRB is. I mean, even if you're not a kind of born solidarity unionist like I was, you kind of forced now to really look beyond NLRB, representation elections.
We'll be right back after these messages. If you'd like to listen to our podcast without any ads, please join us on Patreon. There you can also listen to an exclusive bonus episode with Daniel. Support from you, our listeners on Patreon, is the only way we're able to make this podcast. Learn more and join us at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. Looking back, I did ask Daniel if he had any thoughts about if there was anything the union could have done better.
To kind of put a theme for what we could have really done differently is strange because we were so committed to solidarity unionism, but inadvertently, really not intentionally, kind of unknowingly, we had let seep in some traditional union tactics and thinking and strategy. So let me just start with kind of a straightforward one because I know it's important stuff for union builders today. And I want to be really concrete. So just kind of start as concrete as I can. One is, in traditional unionism, this is kind of might be hard to really realize, but you often leave a lot of power on the table because you don't want to actually show the opponent that you need to sign the deal, that you're going to really go all out with the power that you have. And one way you can kind of see that is in many kind of like fast food or retail campaigns across many different unions. It's not to single anyone out at all. Different unions, different industries. You'll see that, for example, there's not usually an effort to really bring in supply chain workers into like a cohesive union with the retail side. Now, Starbucks Workers Union, we rejected that. We had really important initiatives to try to build in the roasting plants, right? I'm not giving anything away here. Like everyone knows the roasting plants at Starbucks are choke points. Everyone knows the distribution hubs at Walmarts are choke points. This is not like giving anything away. At that time, especially, I think Starbucks had maybe 2 roasting plants for the whole country. And then I think all of Europe, was supplied by, I believe, something in the Netherlands, a plant. So real choke points. I don't want to underappreciate the work we did because we did a lot. We connected with roasting plant workers who had issues with the company. We generally tried to engage that part. But what I would want to do now is say, you know what, this is not just like a priority or important, like this is a must. We actually need to do this. This is a essential. I would really, really, really want to do that. It wouldn't be easy. I mean, there's many, many obstacles to accomplishing that. The company knows it's a choke point, obviously, but I would want to, as much as we did, I'd want to do a lot more just to have a much more existential power. So that was a key way. Another way, and this might be a little more subtle, so I wanted to kind of get to the roasting plant part first. We took inadvertently from traditional unionism this idea of, hey, you kind of get organized, let's say, at least in the best of traditional unionism, you're still supposed to get organized, right? Then you go public and then you fight this fight to get to the victory, right? Just kind of an all-out fight in a way. I mean, maybe you're leaving power on the table, but you go public and you're like, boom, that's it. It's all about getting to, obviously in traditional unionism, it's a contract. For us, it wasn't the contract, but we still did that thing of, hey, you organize at your store. Yes, you're part of the citywide campaign. You're part of the national campaign through coalitions. You're part of the global campaign. But you also do this going public thing at your store where you then kind of do like a all out knockout drag out fight with Starbucks at your store. What happens there is you're using like a lot of energy in that knockout drag out fight. Instead, what I would want to do now, looking back, is we had this beautiful community, right? Where we were just by being in community, enjoying a lot of value from that. But then also, there's just so many victories around discrimination, around countless issues of how the stores were operated. We could win at the store level, we could win at the district level, we could win at the regional level, and we won. And then on the other hand, there was these national or corporate wide stuff that we were able to win on as well. So what I would want to do is still have the store organization be the cell, right? Be the base, definitely. But be more thoughtful and more experimental about, hey, how do we really make this a sustainable piece of value that we create together? Do our solidarity, because there was so much there, but we didn't lean into it enough because we just spent so much time on these knockout drag out fights and all the firings that came with it and all the energy that that takes. I would have definitely wanted to break more from traditional unionism there. It's not about getting to this exact point in time where the company accepts XYZ. It's more about creating value together through the struggle through our community.
For a pretty ragtag bunch of young radicals and anarchists, and disgruntled baristas of all ages, the Starbucks Workers' Union managed to have an effect well beyond its numbers.
So one of the remarkable things about the IWW Starbucks Workers Union was how it went on to really have a lasting impact in the labor movement. And there's probably like kind of a few big ones that it might be just worth sharing here briefly. First in that era, many millions of workers in large swathes of the economy were considered unorganizable. And service, especially fast food and retail, was a major case in point. We really rejected that any workers were unorganizable and held that we actually could organize. And we really broke new ground in that not only were we the first union at the kind of contemporary Starbucks corporation, once it became like a corporation, but also the first union in fast food in the United States in recent memory. This is not to take away from those that had come before, but just to say in that moment, what we were coming into. And that has really had a good effect over time in that now there's really few people would just say, yeah, retail, fast food, unorganizable, because there's been so much work in that.
In terms of fast food organising which came before, you can learn about the McDonald's Workers' Resistance Group, which was founded in Scotland in the late 1990s in episode 5 of our Working Class Literature podcast. As well as in fast food, other groups of workers were considered impossible to organise as well.
I mean, digital journalists, they were called unorganizable. They've organized, right? So, I mean, the SCIU Fight for 15, that's one obvious example. SCIU is one of the unions that was following closely what IWW baristas were doing. And 8 years after we launched, they launched their fast food campaign. Very different campaign. But, that campaign with its very, very, very large media footprint, that shifted the discourse even further than we had shifted it around the importance of this work in society, the importance of union organizing in that space. Not as well known as SCIU Fight for 15, but the Jimmy John's campaign from the IWW, came directly out of the Starbucks campaign. It was a very impressive campaign in many ways, broke new ground, didn't get as far as they wanted, but showed that this could expand beyond Starbucks. And then the next IWW campaign, kind of in this lineage, and other lineages, as many seeds go into any union fight, was the IWW or is the IWW Burgerville Workers Union. And, for folks who are interested in kind of union certification, contract unionism, that was the first in the US, just at a fast food chain. through very durable, tight organizing, a powerful strike the Burgerville folks did, deep integration in the community. They've built a very, very beautiful, long-standing union.
Burgerville workers first unionised with the IWW back in 2016. Now, they still represent the 100 Burgerville workers across 5 locations in the Pacific Northwest. And since 2023, workers at least 4 branches of Pete's Coffee have also unionised with the IWW.
Last one I'll say is there's a giant upsurge of immigrant food factory workers in New York City on the factory level, which was a direct offshoot of the Starbucks organizing. We did a lot of work together. A lead organizer on that campaign was quoted in the press at the time on the food factory campaign, quote, "Wow, the ghost stirs. The red cars are stirring again," speaking to the kind of inspiration from my courageous coworkers were able to accomplish. So yeah, you fast forward today, it's like, all the time you're hearing a group of workers that was supposedly unorganizable has announced they've organized, right? And that's been a beautiful thing over the last 10 years. I think second impact IWW Starbucks Workers Union demonstrated the possibility and the potency of union building that was initiated, led, and operated by workers with a big independent vision, not conceived of by any union institution, right? Baristas did this union. We did the organizing, not in a vacuum. Want to be clear. We had many collaborators, many wonderful solidarity partners, but we directed the work. We did the predominant amount of it. And, the powers that be, they understood what a game changer, what we were bringing in was. There was a recording was leaked of a conference call between some influential bosses and their union busters. It was during the time of trying to pass the Employee Free Choice Act.
The Employee Free Choice Act was a proposed law which would allow for workers to get union recognition much more straightforwardly, simply by getting a majority of workers to sign union membership cards, and it would actually fine employers who broke the law. While a version of the law was approved by both houses of Congress in 2007, in the Senate it only got 51 votes in favour and 48 against, so it didn't reach the 60 votes in favour needed to overcome the Republican filibuster.
It made waves because one of the billionaires on the call, the Home Depot billionaire, he said, if we expand union rights, it'll be the quote end of civilization. So the call was famous for that. But on the call also was the kind of top gun of union busting, which was Richard Berman was his name. He's no longer with us anymore, and I can't say I shed a tear. But Berman warned the oligarchs on the call. He's like, there's something happening going on. There's this thing where workers are not waiting around to be organized. They're organizing themselves. And he coined the term. He called this looming specter the Starbucks problem, right? Referring to our campaign. So sometimes the anti-union lawyers, they have some good insight into what's going on. There is another one looking at the Jimmy John's fight and solidarity unionism in Starbucks. He's saying, this kind of unionism, it addresses issues from a broader, more global perspective. Quote, "They see solidarity as drawing the boundary of the struggle of the working class as widely as possible." Right? Like, okay, that's pretty on point. I got to hand it to that particular union busting lawyer. And I think I would be remiss, and this will be the last point, the beautiful kind of impacts or seeds that the Starbucks Workers Union anticipates is trans and gender queer union organizing. Today, right, we're now over 20 years later, this is a very major pronounced phenomenon in US unionism. You can't miss the leadership of trans workers of color, genderqueer workers, other marginalized folks. You see this in the Starbucks Workers Union campaign, leaders from this community, but not just leaders from this community, making that connection between their gendered experience and unionism. One leader from this community in the union was Liberty Locke. Liberty mentored many. And she wrote too, and the writing endures. One of her pieces I'd recommend to anyone, it's as resonant today as it always was, is called My Body, My Rules, a case for rape and domestic violence survivors becoming workplace organizers. It's things that you hear now much more commonly from workers, making this connection for safety for trans people through unionism, genderqueer folks, women folks, survivors of domestic violence and rape in the case of this particular article. And it's incredibly, incredibly powerful to look back and think about those seeds that we were able to, as a campaign, help bring out.
Indeed, this was a really powerful article. I still remember when I first read it as a piece which went viral on social media nearly 15 years ago. The union also provided a really useful introduction to trans rights as workers' rights for organisers. We'll pop a link to both of them in the show notes. Today, Daniel and others are trying to apply the lessons learned from the experiences of Starbucks workers in the 2000s in their organising now with the Solidarity Union Network.
The really positive thing about, I think, some of the learnings is that today, solidarity unionism is so much more advanced. I know the IWW has advanced greatly. The network I'm with, the Solidarity Union Network, Sun, is an example. Now workers organizing in their shops and in their industries through Sun, design their own union models, discuss it, analyze it, piece together all the building blocks, and then go and learn and experiment very intentionally on what works or what doesn't through this very intentional struggle and process. It's not just the framework and the tools, there's a community of solidarity union builders, who learn together, build together, really concretely look at, hey, the sustainability piece of each part of the union. Are the gains we win sustainable? Are we renewing leadership and membership sustainably? Are our finances sustainable? Being really diligent about that, being diligent about how much power it takes. So in addition to all the kind of other big picture developments that have been good, like last 10 years, of course, we see this really tremendous motion in the US working class and some other working classes. We also just have a better tool set, community, and framework, just more advanced than we had. And a lot of those advancements can look to the Starbucks Workers Union, amongst many others, as really valuable experiences that went into developing some of these tools and some of these community frameworks.
Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire.
That brings us to the end of the main part of this mini-series. But we also have a bonus episode with more information from Daniel about his work and activism. This is available exclusively for our supporters on Patreon, who make our work possible. So if you appreciate our work, do think about joining us at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. If you can't spare the money right now, do not worry about it. But if you can, tell your friends about this podcast, share links to it on your social media accounts, and take a second to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favourite podcast app. We've got books by Daniel and others available in our online store, including an account of organising at Starbucks and a really useful book called Labour Law for the Rank and Filer, along with other organising guides. Check them out on the link in the show notes. And as a listener of this podcast, you can get 10% off your first order using the discount code WCHPodcast. Daniel also has a new book out now with Haymarket called Unions of Our Own, so look out for that. And he's currently organising with the Solidarity Union Network. Learn more about both of these on the link in the show notes. Learn more about the IWW in the rest of our podcast series about the union, so check out episodes 6, 9, 16, 19, 52, 73, 74, and episode 1 of the Working Class Literature podcast. As always, we've got more information, sources, and eventually a transcript on the webpage for this episode. Link in the show notes. Thanks to our Patreon supporters for making this podcast possible. Special thanks to Jazz Hands. Our theme tune is Bella Ciao. Thanks for permission to use it from Dischi del Sole. You can buy it or stream it on the links in the show notes. This episode was edited by Jesse French. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time.